Hey everyone, it's Andrew Nagel of Valk9 Designs, and we're back again to start working on the next part of the start to finish design. We're doing this symmetrical design. It's also got a tree of life in there. We're going to need our Argentium Silver for this video, your pliers that you use for soldering, a cup of water for dipping the frame in. Obviously we have our design and then our soldering station as well. And so to get going, we're going to be drawing out the framework on the design. You'll notice I changed the top part of the bale. And so to start drawing this design, we're going to start, with all of my tree designs, when I'm drawing out the frame, I start this loop that is, where the tree is going to go. And then I start to draw out the rest of the frame. Now, as you notice up here, we were going to do 2 of these dangle bales before, but we're only going to do 1. I tried doing the double dangle bale on another pendant, and it just didn't really sit right. That only really works if you're attaching a chain to both of those dangles or something like that. So after we finish off the loop where the tree is going to be built, we're going to start to draw the rest of the frame. Bringing those lines out. And then basically I want to keep it all even, and that's why I like this gridded paper, because as you just saw, I created a dot on the equal side, the reflected side, as the other side. So basically I have that dot ever so many squares out on this drawing. I have that point 6 squares to the right and then 6 squares to the left as well. And so as you can see, I just keep counting these points of where these lines go in and out, so that way I can keep both sides of the frame balanced as I build it. This is where I get basically the evenness in my designs is starting off with an even frame, and this gridded paper truly helps me achieve that. Finishing up that other side, we now have the outline done, and we can start drawing in the supports on this. And again, the gridded paper helps me draw out, where I want my supports to be and keep those even as well. Drawing on the ceramic brick proves to be a little difficult, but improvise, adapt, overcome. And so we have that drawn out, we're ready to rock and roll. And anytime you're soldering, make sure you are using safety. Again, you need a 3M respirator or the like, something that has the chemical filtration. We are using Argentium Silver, so we won't need solder or flux because the Argentium Silver contains trace amounts of germanium. So we have our length of 18 square ready to rock and roll. I've got my design close by as well. And again, the Argentium has trace amounts of germanium in it, so that way that allows the silver to fuse to itself and you don't need solder or flux, which is very convenient as you're building these things. So as we've got my design close by, ready to rock and roll. I like to start where the design tees off at the bottom of the loop and then shape the loop from there. I'll use my pliers and my hands to shape the top curve. Again, a natural curve always looks better than a forced curve, so I'll use my hands as much as possible to shape that loop. And I always just keep checking back with the design just to make sure I'm on the right path. And we're getting close down to the bottom. And we're ready to shape our bottom T. We're going to want to bring both edges just so they're touching, so I bring it straight across and then I form my T down with the extra wire. Then now, we're ready to solder this together. Over on our ceramic honeycomb blocks, Again, if you've seen my soldering tutorials, you should be aware of these. They're a great surface to solder on. We've got our torch and we're igniting. And now when you heat this, the heat is going to travel to the thinnest part first. So start at the thinnest part of the wire, then work your way up to the loop and keep that flame moving and keep the heat even across the whole piece of metal. Once you see the fusion, you're ready to pull that off and dip it in the water. Now we're rechecking the frame with the design and we're going to form the outer details. Well, the outline of the design, that is. So we're taking that bend right at the bottom there and we're forming the bottom point. I'm always bringing the design back down just to make sure I'm following where I need to be, using those pliers to kind of shape that point a little bit more. We're going to continue that wire up the side and then form the right side of the frame. Now you want to try and make your bends in your wire as sharp as possible. As you'll notice, I'm taking my pliers there and I'm flattening the wires that's right next to the bend and making the bend not sharp, but making the corner as sharp as I can, so that way it's very defined. Forming the top part. And then what you'll notice I do here is I flip it over, and I do this with all my frames as I'm forming them. It's especially when I need it to be super balanced like this. I do it so that way I'm shaping that side off of, the same side of the drawing, even though it's balanced. I just do that so that gives me more of a chance of having both sides shaped exactly the same. And then as we get down to the bottom, we're going to curve that over, and this is ready for soldering. And now we're back on the brick, and again, keep the flame moving all over. You want to heat the whole piece as you're soldering this together. Again, I suggest watching one of my soldering tutorials. You can just search for that in the search bar and find that. So as we get that top support, we're going to move down to the bottom support. Again, I did the top support first. That kind of holds this loop in place. And now we're going to fuse the bottom. Here you see I have a little bit of an accident. I fused those bottom two sides together right there. But not all is lost. Sometimes I would take that apart and redo the side, but I'm going to flatten this out and see how it fits on my design first and see if it's salvageable. So here we are, we're going to hammer this out. As I flatten this out, I'm starting to think it's going to be salvageable. I hold it up to my design a couple times and it matches up pretty good to the original drawing, so we're going to go ahead and move forward with attaching the support beams onto the frame. Now I try to keep all of my support beams attached to the same side, so as you'll notice near the top, it is the same side that we put that original support beam on. So we're going to start, holding the Argentium over and measuring the lengths that we need to start doing this and lining up our supports. We're going to solder some on and flatten them out and keep soldering them on. So sometimes I will line up as many of these supports on there as I can and get going, but right now I'm going to start with just 3. Sometimes it gets annoying because they like to shift. As you can see, that's why it's nice to have a pair of pliers that you use for soldering only, because they're going to get burnt. And so again, keeping the heat moving as much as possible. And then I always do, you'll see me do those taps on the frame before I try and pull it off. I've tried to pull a frame up too early, like while it was still hot, and the metal hadn't completely fused together, and that has broken the frame before, and so I do those taps to try and help cool it down and just get the metal to get back to a solid state before pulling it off of the frame, or before pulling it off of the blocks. It's really frustrating when you pull that up and it breaks, and so, you know, give it some time. You can kind of see the metal come back down to a, you know, not cool temperature, but you can see the metal come back down to a hard temperature. You know, you can see it go from the flash point back down to the regular metal, and then that's when you pull it off. So again, just adding more supports up there on the right side. I'm doing just a couple at a time. I didn't want to, you know, try and manage throwing all of them on there. Some of my smaller pendants, I'll just throw all the support beams on there because it'll mainly be just like 2 or 3 support beams. But this one's quite a lot, and so we're just adding them on and making sure we're putting them in the right positions. So again, keep that heat even. You want to heat the whole piece. And keep dipping it in between soldering times. So every time you attach a couple of the support frames, go ahead and dip it, bring it back. I wouldn't hammer it until you've attached all of the support frames. When you hammer it down, everything, like all the metal, seems to flatten out and shift. So you want to have all of your support frames already attached before you do that. I'll link a couple of different torches in the description. You're going to want to check with your city ordinances if you're, you know, doing things like oxygen tanks and stuff like that. At least in my city, they do want to know if you're housing those sorts of tanks in your workspace. That's why I do a butane torch, just because it's a little bit less paperwork. It's a bit easier for me to manage. So we're adding on the last couple of supports here. We're going to add a couple more to the top, but these will be the last for the bottom sides. Again, keep the torch, you know, moving. You don't want to hold it in one spot for too long. These are just wires, and, you know, they will ball up and melt into a quick thing real quick. Or melt into a big mess real quick. We're adding on the last top 2 supports here, fusing it all together. We're going to give it one last dip, and then we're going to move it over to hammering. It's fun playing with the speed up function on this video editing, especially with these hammering points. It makes the sound really interesting. We're going to flatten this out, and then we're going to move it back over to the ceramic bricks for one last heating, and we're going to attach some rectangular wire that I use to stamp the silver. So here I've got a section of 3x1 rectangular wire. You don't have to do this part, this is totally optional. I'm adding this because I use the 3x1 wire to add my maker's mark, and then also the sterling and Argentium stamps onto the frame. So what we're going to do is, I've got my length of solder here. This is kind of a look into the normal soldering of sterling silver. So we've added our flux there as well. That's what I painted on with the brush. I also have a sterling silver soldering video where we use the flux and the solder, so go check that out as well. Sometimes I put the little clippings of solder on there to start with, and then I'll heat it up and let it fuse. But this just really simply, I just wanted to go ahead, and this is called stick soldering, when you just kind of attach it there and let a little bit fuse onto the metals. Letting that all fuse through, add some to the bottom there. It's ready to rock and roll. Again, heat the whole frame through, and then we're going to be ready to dip this back in the water, and it'll be finished up. So I hope you all enjoyed this. I'm going to split the frame up into 2 different sections so that we can go a bit more in depth with the polishing, just like I went a little bit more in depth with this part. So we have our frame, we're ready. I'm going to set it in the pickle pot, and so in the next video we're going to stamp it and clean it all up and get it ready to rock and roll and start building it. Thanks everyone for your patience with this. I appreciate the support here, and I hope you have an amazing day.